is the highest before at this corner. And we just adjusted the parking lot. We got a little creative. We just made some smaller landscaped islands on the ends, which still meet Bedford's code. And what we did was to, minimize the amount of disturbance and impervious area, but we tried to keep the same number of parking spaces because obviously those are very valuable and we need a variance for those. So what we did was we reduced the depth of the parking spaces in Bedford and reduced the aisle width of the drive aisles in Bedford to match Mount Kisco's code, to sort of standardize the parking lot, where previously we met Mount Kisco's code on the Mount Kisco portion of the site and Bedford's code on the Bedford portion. We looked at this and in speaking with Jim Diamond, in 2006, when this site was redeveloped from what it previously was, everything was a standardized parking space and layout that met Mount Kisco standards. So the thought was we could ask Bedford if we could continue that logic for this design, which enabled us to gain more parking in a smaller footprint and thus pull back the retaining wall quite a bit in this area here. So preliminarily, we have a layout plan which was completed and submitted as part of the Zoning Board of Appeals application to Mount Kisco 2 weeks ago. The grading plan is preliminary, but it results in less earthwork, less steep slopes disturbance, smaller retaining wall heights, and I guess as a result, there'd be less tree removal along the steep slope between the upper driveway and the lower parking lot. So there was a lot of, good impacts from doing this. And, we thought it would be appropriate now to share that with you. We're still working on it, but we would like your feedback.
All right, thanks, Steve. So I think we'll probably leave that feedback until, we can dig into it and really, obviously we're seeing this for, live for the first time. Right. I'll give my quick reaction is that anything that can, lower the size and scale of that wall is going to be a positive. We have to look at, is there a trade-off here that I'm not seeing at the moment? I don't see the negatives associated with it, but I'll want to review that. But
right, of course.
On first blush, I think that what you're suggesting, that you've been able to reduce the size and bulk of that retaining wall is a positive thing and something we've been encouraging. So on a first blush comment, I would think that that's positive.
Okay. Yeah, we intend to refine this design and submit something, submit new plans for the upcoming August meeting. So, you guys would have time to review them and digest them and then have the discussion then. We just thought tonight would be, kind of a good idea to just show you what direction we're headed in.
Yeah, and can I just ask, when you said the difference between Mount Kisco's code for parking and Bedford's, can you elaborate on what that is numerically?
Sure. So
something.
In terms of the parking spaces, both municipalities are 9.5 feet wide. But in terms of the depth, Mount Kisco requires 18.5 feet and Bedford requires 20. So we're going to ask them for a 1.5 foot less deep parking space. And then Mount Kisco requires a 24 foot wide drive aisle and Bedford requires a 25 foot aisle. So we would ask them for 1 foot. Again, the thought was, since this was basically how the site was designed in 2006 when it was redeveloped. Everything met Mount Kisco's code then, kind of a standardized way of doing it. At the time, Bedford was okay with it. Our thought is that they would be okay with it in this case as well, given the amount of positive impacts it would have.
So if I can synopsize, Bedford's preparing for Chevy Suburbans and we're preparing for, Honda Pilots. Okay, just check. All right. Okay. So I think we would still like that rendering of that wall, and I'm glad that it's going to be smaller. But again, visual help is going to be useful for us, those visual aids. So hopefully you will have time to prepare some renderings, but I'm glad that you're able to gain some space back, do a little bit less intrusion into that area, and lower that wall. As I think you mentioned, there was a report that we received just the other day, which is Bedford's traffic consultants report. We have not had a chance to dig into it. It arrived, well past our deadline just on Friday. So this will be forwarded to Mount Kisco's traffic consultant for review, and we would expect that at the next meeting, we'll be able to get his take on Bedford's take on the traffic consultant, on the traffic study. But hopefully everyone will be somewhat in alignment. Any other changes or anything else, Stephen, that you want to highlight before we move on?
No, it's quite a bit of change, but hopefully viewed as minor overall. But that's pretty much it. We haven't gotten much past the grading design yet. Okay.
And I encourage other board members, if just off the cuff comments on Mr. Spina's submission, knowing that it hasn't been fully vetted by everyone yet. If anyone would like to make a comment, please feel free.
What's the changing part?
Oh, go ahead, John.
No, you go. It's fine.
My thoughts are that anytime you can reduce walls, the size of walls is good for the applicant. It's good for the site. And if we're doing so in a way in which we're not ending up with more impervious surface, and it sounds like we're not, then I think it's a positive change and one we would typically encourage at the outset if we were given the opportunity to do it. So I think it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Mr. Oxy?
Yeah, my other question was, is parking going to be losing parking spaces, or are we gaining parking spaces?
This design now does not lose or gain any parking. It ended up being the same.
Wonderful.
So yeah, that was our goal, was to sort of keep that number, so it made everything less complicated in terms of where we are now in the process. But to, like John said, reduce impervious area, reduce all the other impacts. So this is kind of where we ended up.
Looks good.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Seeing none, this is a public hearing, so I will again, mention to the public that there are multiple methods for commenting on this application. You can comment on the chat function of Facebook Live. There is a phone number. Let me see if I can bring that up. Phone number is 914-420-0383, and that's being monitored at Village Hall. We're also live at Village Hall at the moment, is my understanding. And additionally, you can submit a written comment either through email or a regular mail to the planning board. And because this this public hearing will be continued, your comments will be heard at the next meeting where we have this public hearing. So if there are no other comments, Pete, do we have anything coming in from the public at this point?
Let me just check the Facebook because it's a 5-second delay.
No problem.
Nobody here would like to speak on this application?
All right. Thank you very much. So we will, I'd like to have a motion that we adjourn this public hearing to the next available meeting, which is on August 11th. Would someone make that motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
A lot of seconds. Very well. Michelle?
Vice Chair Velarde,
Aye.
Mr. Valesi,
Aye.
Ms. Pickard,
Aye.
Mr. Hochstein,
Aye.
Mr. Bigliotti,
Aye.
Mr. Bonfort,
Aye.
Chairman Hertz.
Aye. All right. We'll see you in August. Thank you very much. And we look for the full submission.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
You're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Good night.
All right. The next item on the agenda is a continued public hearing for New York Luxury Motors for both 299 Kisco Avenue and 41 Kensico Drive. They have asked to be adjourned to the next meeting. So we will adjourn them to the same meeting of August 11th. Jan, do we need a motion for that?
Yes.
Okay. I will make the motion that we adjourn New York Luxury Motors for the sites 299 Kisco Avenue and 41 Kensico Drive for site plan and wetland permits. That would be a continued public hearing. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Michelle?
Was John Hochstein the second?
John, yes.
Chairman Hertz,
Aye.
Mr. Hochstein,
Aye.
Ms. Pickard,
Aye.
Mr. Bigliotti,
Aye.
Mr. Bonfort,
Aye.
Mr. Valesi,
Aye.
Vice Chair Velarde.
Aye.
Great. Okay, so we will see them in August as well. The next item on the agenda is a public hearing for Anthony J. and Catherine R. Piergostini, 314 Spring Street. This is for subdivision and steep slopes. I see applicants here. While they're getting online, Jan, would you just introduce this?
Sure. The applications before the board are preliminary subdivision plat approval, final subdivision plat approval, and a steep slopes permit. The property is located at 314 Spring Street within the RS6 and RM12 zoning districts. Properties are split zoned. However, all of the development occurs within the RS6. The property is owned by Anthony and Catherine Piergostini. They own a single family house on the site. They are in contract to purchase a piece of property from the village of Mount Kisco, which they need to effectuate this subdivision. They are currently in contract with the village. They are proposing to subdivide the lot into 2 lots. One lot would contain their existing home. Second lot would be to be developed with a new single family home. That lot does have some steep slopes on it. They would be impacting slopes. Approximately 810 square feet of disturbance would occur on slopes between 15% and 25%, and 420 square feet of disturbance on slopes over 25%. The applications is subject to secret. It's been identified as an unlisted action. The applicant submitted a short EAF. We've scheduled a public hearing for this evening. It's been before the board, I think on 3 occasions. They've received comments from staff. We'll address those comments. There are some additional drainage plans that need to be prepared by the applicant for review by the village engineer. prior to the issuance of any building permit. The project requires the subdivision approval from the health department. That needs to be obtained prior to the signing of the plat. And prior to the issuance of a building permit, they would also need to go to the ARB review of the new single-family home.
Thank you very much. Is the applicant here?
Yes, good evening. Victor Solaric, VKS Architects.
Welcome, Victor. So we have before us a resolution of approval for this application, which includes preliminary subdivision approval, a negative declaration of significance, final subdivision plat approval, and a steep slopes permit. Have you and your client had a chance to review this resolution?
Yes, we have. Thank you very much for preparing this. If possible, I would like to go through a couple of the points that we have noticed that I would like to clarify if possible.
Sure.
I'll go on to basically page 2 of the draft resolution. The second, be it further resolved that the Planning Board of Village of Mount Kisco hereby grants the approval, and with the A and B, C, obviously the plans that have been submitted. Then on page 3, the second, be it further resolved, I wanted to ask the Planning Board why there has to be, or why do you think it needs to be a 1-year limit on the building permit issuance? Because the situation is such that the owners are not sure yet what they will do. They may stay, they may sell their house, build a house next door. They might, you know, it's a very fluid situation, and so it's not likely to be resolved within a year. My understanding.
I think that was just normal, you know, that's the typical time period. It's, I don't believe it's driven by the code. So I think the board does have some discretion there. It's just, that's the normal time frame that's given. So I think it's up for discussion if the board's inclined.
Is there any, from your point of view, is there any negative effect on the approval if the time period is extended or not specifically defined?
That's a great question.
I don't have a concern about that.
Whitney, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I'd have to look it up, but I can understand why they may not want that for purposes of subdivision approval, but for purposes of this steep slopes approval, there may be a time limit on it. I'm researching that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Just like you know, site plan's only good for, it's the same thing. I know it's different for purpose. If the subdivisions continues to be valid and meets the criteria, it will be indefinite as far as its approval time. But as far as the steep slopes, there may be a limit on that, and I'm checking it out right now.
Okay. So
Victor, what do you propose in terms of, if not 100, then you have something in mind?
Well, just to clarify, the 180 days in the second to last be further resolve clause is statutory. It's the last further resolve clause where it's identifying when construction needs to begin on the new residence that could potentially be something that could be modified.
Okay.
yeah, I think the 180 days, the points 1 through 9, actually there is total of 10 because there's 2 number 2s. But I think that the second number 2 is sort of left from previous notes, and I don't think it applies because I haven't seen any new comments from the building inspector, village engineer, and village planner and village attorney. So I think it's, if I'm mistaken, correct me, but I think it's left over from some, previous.
That's a standard condition that's in all of our resolutions. If we have comments, they need to be addressed.
Okay.
There is a, Victor and Chairman, there's a provision, so Jan was correctly including that 1-year provision. Under section 110-33.1E, there's a duration of permit for steep slopes. It's limited to the steep slopes permit shall expire on the completion of the activities and shall only be valid for a period of 1 year from the date of approval or for a period of any other permit or approval issued by the planning board. The permit may be renewed by the planning board for a period of up to 1 year. So, but by our local code, you can only issue the permit for the steep slopes for 1 year.
I see.
And it can be renewed up to 1 year.
Renewed for an additional year.
All right. So if I understand it right, if construction doesn't start within 1 year, the steep slope permit would expire, and the applicant would have to go back to the planning board to renew that steep slopes permit.
Well, you don't have to wait until it expires. You can ask for what we
Absolutely.
typically request that you ask for an extension before it expires.
You're absolutely right. Yes,
Yeah.
I stand corrected. But if
About
that
2 years to pull the building permit, it sounds like, if you apply for the extension.
okay, and if you don't, all this is void except for the subdivision approval.
Correct.
Okay.
But you could pull a building permit, and the building permit's good for a period of, what is that, a year? So maybe it's actually 3 years.
Well, actually, they would have to commence construction within 6 months. Otherwise, it's no longer
Of the issuance of the building permit.
correct.
Yeah.
Now you got 2 years and 6 months. It's going up. It's good.
Okay. So basically, the second be it further resolved is limited by the steep slopes permit code provision that Whitney just quoted. And the 180 days on the previous be it resolved is for us to submit to you final plans for review and get the Mylar signed off.
Yeah, and the 180 days on the subdivision plats renewable in 90-day increments, and that's, as far as I know, almost indefinite at this point. So you can have multiple extensions of the subdivision plat approval.
But you have to come every 3 months.
Yeah, after the 180 days. Yep. But there's no reason not to get that plat signed.
Yeah, well, so once the subdivision is signed, it's good forever.
Good forever.
Right. You just lose your steep slopes permit, or we would lose our steep slopes permit.
After 2 years and 6 months.
Yeah.
Correct.
Victor, have your client speak to an attorney about what a subdivision means forever, because it doesn't necessarily mean forever. Laws can change. So your client should seek advice of counsel as to what other things that your client may be able to do to protect their investment and their subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So this is a public hearing. I know we have one written comment that has been given to the board. I will reiterate, phone number to call in is 914-420-0383. And you can go on Facebook Live through the chat function. We're live at Village Hall. And Pete, is there any other way to join this?
Currently, Chairman, I have that one letter that would like to be read into the record live, and I have one person from the public that's would like to speak on this application so far. And the other methods that you mentioned earlier, you could email or snail mail by regular mail the written comments, and they can be read at the next meeting.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Miley, would you read the letter we received, and then we'll hear from the live member who's with you?
Will do. The letter was written from Anita Joseph, 304 Spring Street. They're the property owner. It is regarding a public hearing on 314 Spring Street application subdivision. Thank you for your notice about a public hearing on the application for steep slope permit for the construction at 314 Spring Street, which is the property alongside my property. The notice states, quote, "The future development of proposed lot 1 will result in disturbance to regulated steep slopes and a steep slope permit is required," unquote. I am concerned about the construction of a house on the steep slopes may result in vibrations or other impacts that might compromise the foundation and structure of my house and surrounding land. I am also concerned about floods during heavy rainfall due to the number of trees that will be removed from the area. How can I obtain appropriate insurance coverage by the applicant for any damage to my property that may manifest during construction or several years later, resulting from, quote, disturbance, unquote, caused by construction on the closed or to the steep slope? I am an essential worker at Northwest Hospital and will not be able to attend the public meeting. Please have this message read aloud at the public meeting made part of the public record. Thank you for your help. Anita Joseph, property owner, 304 Spring Street.
Thank you. And you have someone who wants to speak live at your site?
We have one person, Mr. John Rhodes, would like to speak publicly, and we're going to bring him up in a second.
All right.
Take the mute button off. Microphone. Just bear with us, folks.
Yeah, no problem. And if everyone, if all of our panel can mute, that would be great.
We're good. Thanks. Oh, there we are. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity. I just actually had a couple of questions about this application, but first I'd just like to thank, Michelle and Ken and Felipe and everyone who put this live part of this meeting together. I don't know if people at home realize it, but it's still pretty hot in Mount Kisco and there's no air conditioning in this room, so they did a really great job under very difficult conditions. The question that I have about this particular application, and the reason it caught my eye, and we discussed it at the last CAC meeting also, was that the question is the sale of the land from the town to the applicant dependent on them receiving a steep slopes permit? That's the first question. And the second question is, since the town is selling property that's on actually a very steep slope, did the town conduct an inspection of the property before that to see if it was suitable for the use that the applicant was buying it for? I'm familiar with that particular stretch of land, and the slope is very steep and it goes down towards the conservation area. So we're concerned that any construction there might create some problems in the future. I wanted to make sure that due diligence had been done. That's my question. Thank you.
Chairman? Chairman, can I weigh in on that particular comment since it can be kind of easily addressed?
Please do.
Yeah.
Okay.
We just have to raise the volume here because they had some echo. A lot of adjustments here. I apologize. All right, you good?
No problem.
Okay, John, it kind of jumped out at me when we were talking about what the actions being undertaken were as they were relayed by Jan. I did want to make it very clear that the sale of the municipal property is no way contingent upon any approvals. They are buying the land. They are obligated to close irrespective irrespective of whether or not they get an approval for either subdivision or a steep slope. So there's no other action there required. One's not contingent upon the other. With regard to the site itself, the village board has undertaken an analysis of all the properties that were foreclosed for unpaid taxes and determined, after doing an analysis of each of the properties, which properties were suitable for sale and which were not. So I can't comment upon the engineering, the drainage, the steep slopes, or anything like that, but I can say that there was an analysis done by the village board.
All right, thank you.
I would address quickly the property layout and the design as it pertains to the steep slopes.
Please.
The section. Sorry. The section of the property that's contemplated to be purchased by the applicant, by the owners, is actually not being utilized for any construction. It is just purchased to obtain the necessary area for a compliant lot, but all the construction is as far away from the steep slopes on the west side of the property, and the steep slopes that are affected by the proposed construction are close to Spring Street. And as is obvious from the site plan, the house is located on the less steep portion of the property. And really only the driveway and the front yard are being developed that are part of the steep slopes.
Thank you, Victor. Do we have anyone else who wishes to speak on this application?
Let me confirm, though.
Thank you.
Anybody else would like to speak on the application? You good, John?
Okay.
Good. We're good, Doug.
Thank you. So, Victor, I do want to make, the village engineer could not make it to this meeting. He had a conflict, unfortunately. He did convey and has conveyed that there are still some open issues with regards to drainage on the site. And, one of the conditions, so if we go to the draft resolution, and if you go to page 4,
okay.
Item 11 does say stormwater mitigation measures shall be designed to the satisfaction of the village engineer. So as of today, we haven't gotten there yet. Typically, that level of detail is usually left to after planning board approval, is left to the discretion of the village engineer, and for you and the applicant to prepare suitable documentation and construction drawings to satisfy his concerns. And certainly the concern that the neighbor expressed would be covered under that condition 11. Additionally, condition 12 talks about if land disturbance exceeds 5,000 square feet, you'll also have to obtain a New York State DEC speedies permit for stormwater runoff from construction activities. So there are a few things that are still open-ended and are going to have to be completed to the satisfaction of the village engineer, village planner, the village building inspector, until this gets to the end. But that said, I believe that from a project perspective from the planning board, we've received adequate information to move this forward, which is why we've asked the village planner to put together this draft resolution. So with that, I'll open it up to board members for questions, concerns, and comments. All right, seeing none, is it the pleasure of the board to close the public hearing and take a vote on this application tonight, or does anyone feel that we need additional input before we do so? I'd love to actually hear from everyone.
I believe we're in a position where we could close the public hearing and act.
Anyone feel differently?
Yeah.
Okay, with that.
I'll agree. And
Okay.
I also think we addressed the applicant's neighbor's concern adequately and will be addressed adequately, so that all issues will be looked into in terms of stormwater prevention and any vibration and any other construction disturbance.
Thank you. All right, with that said, would someone make a motion to close this public hearing?
I'll make the motion. I'll make the motion, Chairman, to close the public hearing for.
Do I hear a second?
I will
Just
second that.
Nope. All right, we have a motion by Mr. Fonfort, and I believe a second by Mr. Plessy. So, Michelle, would you pull the board?
Mr. Bonfort,
Aye.
Mr. Pelesi,
Aye.
Ms. Pickard,
Aye.
Mr. Hochstein,
Aye.
Mr. Bigliotti.
Ralph, unmute. You're still muted. Say aye and I'll read your lips.
That's an aye.
Vice Chair Benlardi,
Aye.
Chairman Hurd.
Aye. All right. So the public hearing is closed on this application. We have received some public input. We have a draft resolution before us. And I believe it's the feeling of the board that the protections afforded in the resolution will properly protect and address the issues that have been brought up. In particular, the items we've talked about, condition 11, stormwater mitigation measures shall be designed to the satisfaction of the village engineer. A general permit for stormwater runoff from construction activities if land disturbance hits a certain level. The applicant will have to obtain all the approvals from the Village Architectural Review Board, have to retain the necessary approvals from the Village Department of Public Works for connections to village water and sewer. Additionally, and some of these are boilerplate, but applicants shall submit a schedule for all earthwork and land disturbance to the village engineer for approval, and that should properly notice and protect the adjoining property owners. It's going to be staked out. There'll be pre-construction meetings. Village engineer and planner shall have the right to inspect the property during construction, construction during times permitted, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe that there are adequate and proper conditions to ensure that this project will be done to the satisfaction and the standards of this village. With that said, I'd like to make the motion to approve the negative declaration of significance, preliminary subdivision plat approval, final subdivision plat approval, and steep slopes permit for 314 Spring Street.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Chairman.
Thank you. Any comment, any question?
No.
Hearing none. Michelle, would you poll the board?
Mr. Bigliotti,
Aye.
Mr. Bonfort,
Aye.
Ms. Pickard,
Aye.
Mr. Hochstein,
Aye.
Mr. Pelesi,
Aye.
Vice Chair Benlardi,
Aye.
Chairman Hertz.
Aye. Congratulations. And you have your 1 year and and if you need more time, you understand the mechanisms for extension.
Thank you very much for your hard work. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure Mr. Pierre
Thank
as
you.
well. I just wanted to ask quickly, I had a really hard time getting on the meeting tonight, and I wasn't sure whether it was on my end or what, but was there a limitation as to what time we could sign in? Because so we've been trying from 7 o'clock on and really couldn't get on until just before 8 o'clock.
Yeah, Chairman, there was a waiting period, and most are sent to the waiting room. There's a large number of people that are trying to get on, and we're monitoring the scene, but everybody's getting an opportunity.
Okay,
Thank
I
you
just
very
wanted to make sure that I didn't mess anything up.
No, you're good. We've seen you in the back. We'd seen you in the background. We just didn't let you on until it was your time to speak.
Good control measures. Thank you very
This
much.
time, Victor, this time.
All right, I get it. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much. Good luck. Okay, the next item on the agenda is a continued public hearing for site plan for SCS Sorrel Street, 180 South Bedford Road. As my firm is an applicant to this, I am recused from this, and Vice Chair Benlardi will be hearing this application. I will turn my video.
Okay. So this is for SCS Sorrel Street, 180 South Bedford Road. This is the first evening that this matter is on the agenda for a public hearing. Michelle or Peter, have all of the required notices been sent out for this public hearing?
Joe? Yes, that's correct.
And Jan or Whitney, do we need to take any formal action to open the public hearing? What was that, Whitney? You were muted.
Sorry, I'm having some difficulty with my technical skills. No, you're opening the public hearing. There's no motion.
Okay, thank you. All right, so public hearing is now open. The process for the benefit of the public is that we will have the planning board's planner give a brief overview of the application procedure to date. This matter has been before this board for several months. We'll then turn it over to the applicant to make a presentation of the application, and then we'll have an opportunity for the public to participate with comment. As is the case with the prior public hearings that have taken place tonight, there are several ways to participate. One is live at the Village Hall, and it'll be via Zoom. There's also Facebook Live through the chat function. You can call in with your comments to 914. Is that 420-0383? Did I get that correct?
Yeah, you broke up, John. 420-0383.
Okay. That's telephone. And then you'll also be able to submit your comments in writing, either by email or regular mail. There have been a number of written comments that have been received. I'll touch on those after planner gives his overview. So with that, Jan, if you'd give us an overview of the project to date.
Sure, I'll go through the submissions that have been made by the applicant to date and some of the actions that were taken by the board throughout the review process. So this application started back in February 4th. There was a submission made by the applicant that was made for the February 25th meeting that was conducted. And that submission included an application for site plan approval, steep slopes permit, and a special use permit application for the solar facility. They submitted the site plan checklist, which identifies all of the items that are required to be submitted in accordance with our code. They submitted part 1 of the full EAF, a site plan, site development plan package, a soils map, a survey, and the electrical wiring diagram, which is required by code. During the February 25th meeting, the action was determined to be a type 1 action under SECRA, and the planning board declared its intent to be lead agency so as to conduct a coordinated review under SECRA. They also scheduled a site walk, or the board scheduled a site walk to be conducted on March 7th. So the board at that point in time declared its intent to be lead agency pursuant to SECRA. The next submission was made April 21st. That was made for the May 12th planning board meeting. And that submission included a written response to planning board comments and staff comments, a full site plan package, an alternative site plan, which was requested by the board, a development comparison table, which compared the two plans, and a scope for the biodiversity study, the scope was prepared by the applicant's environmental consultant, ecological analysis. And I had previously discussed what I thought the study should include with Jim Bates of Ecological Analysis prior to that submission. During the 5/12 meeting, or actually there was one meeting in between that on March 10th, at which time the board went through the sidewalk report that had been previously scheduled. And they also referred the application to the fire department at the March 10th meeting. At the 5/12 meeting, the lead agency, they reviewed the alternative plan and they approved the biodiversity scoping document. The next submission came in June 12th. That was a submission made for the June 23rd meeting. Again, it included a full written response to board comments and consultant comments, staff comments. It included development coverage plan, a coverage calculation worksheet to demonstrate compliance with our coverage calculation and zoning code, a fire truck maneuvering plan, a preliminary stormwater pollution prevention plan, a full set of development drawings, a revised Part 1 EAF that responded to our comments, a Part 2 of the environmental assessment form, an updated topography and tree study. It also included a letter from Sunrise Solar, the applicant, identifying a potential future cell application, alerting the board to that. It included the steep slopes permit narrative and the habitat assessment prepared by Ecological Analysis. During the June meeting, we had received a letter from the fire department regarding the plans. The board continued to review both the proposed plan and the alternative. The board did discuss the future cell application, and they scheduled a public hearing for 7/14 tonight. And this is the 7/14 meeting is the fifth meeting the applicant's been before the board. There was another submission in June 16th, again for the June 23rd meeting, which included Part 3 of the environmental assessment form with appendices, a line of sight analysis, cross sections, a decommissioning plan, an operation and maintenance plan, all required by code. And in between there, the planning board did refer the application to the Westchester County Planning Board in accordance with Section 239M of the General Municipal Law. And on 3/23, the board received the planning board's comment letter, which is in the record. That's an overview of what's been submitted and some of the actions that matters that the board's discussed.
Thank you. Peter, if you would, just for the public's benefit, the use, would you just comment on how the code weighs in here with respect to use and what the actions that are required?
So SES Solar Street application 180 South Bedford is a solar farm. It's being proposed in the 110-7 CD Conservation Development District, which permits Tier 3 ground-mounted solar facilities and are subject to special permit to use within the CD zoning district. Accordingly, this applicant must secure a special permit that's pursuant to the provisions of 11046, which is for special permits, and 110-33.2, which is a solar energy supplement regulation. In addition, requires site plan approval pursuant to 110-45. The application proposed will require a setback variance for a structure located within the buffer. The buffer we're speaking of is the closest to Bedford on the Saul Street side. The buffer variance is going to require a 73-foot variance. With respect to the balance of the zoning code, is compliant, so they'll be before your board thereafter once they secure a variance. Is there anything else I could touch on, John?
No, thank you. Before I turn it over to the applicant, I just want to acknowledge some written comments that have been received to date. The board has received a memo from Peter Grunthal, not in his capacity as the village trustee, but as a interested citizen. Some letters from the Moore Sanctuary, which is an adjoining neighbor of the property. Some memos and letters from the CAC and John Rhodes. Letter dated 6/25 from Skull Island Partners, which is the property owner, which refers to a memo of lease with Homeland Towers. And a copy of that memo of lease was attached. There are letters and materials from the neighbor, Rex Pietrobono, who lives at 2 Sarl Street and is an immediately adjoining neighbor. There was a letter from the neighbor, Ellen Malloy and George Coppola, who live at 5 Brentwood Court in the Chase. A letter or email from Hank Freeman, who resides at 7 Cold Spring, also in the Chase. And then a letter from the Romsky family at 8 Brentwood, which was signed by a number of other homeowners in the Chase. So those have all been received. And any comments will be addressed in our review by this board and or by the applicant. So with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant. Who's here this evening? Please identify yourselves for the record.
William Null, Mr. Vice Chairman, with the firm of Cuddy and Fader in White Plains, representing Sunrise Community Solar LLC and the SCS Sarl Street Solar Farm. And I'm here tonight with Logan Peters from Sunrise Solar. Doug Hertz will not be participating, as you know. He's stepping out from commenting and active participation on this matter. Rich Williams, as well as Dawn McKenzie of Insight Engineering are also here, and Jim Bates, from the environmental consultant who was mentioned in Jan's discussion, is also here tonight. I wanted to just comment that while the recitation of approvals is correct, the variance that's needed within the 200-foot buffer is a 72-foot variance, not a 73-foot variance. And there's one other variance that we've also applied for from the zoning board, and that is a 6-inch variance to allow a 7-foot fence, which is what is required under applicable electrical regulations to surround a generator facility such as this, an electricity generator facility. And the solar farm, importantly, is a beneficial, and it's been recognized this way by the village, it's an environmentally beneficial use that the village specifically created and accepted as an important use consistent with New York State's top priority for alternative energy provision here. And the village has said that it's important to make provision for, so far as conditions may permit, the accommodation of solar energy systems and equipment and access to sunlight necessary therefore. This is in section chapter 110, 33.2, which are the applicable regulations. And it's important, the village also says, to advance and protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the people of village for the installation and use of solar energy generating systems and equipment. So while there are other uses permitted on this site, we respectfully submit that this is an environmentally beneficial use that would assist in moving us further away from dependence on fossil fuel. And unlike most uses that are covered in the zoning ordinance, it would not generate any meaningful traffic. It's nominal traffic as far as maintenance itself goes. We can accommodate the drainage and stormwater management, which will be addressed by my colleagues at Insight Engineering in some detail. And there is no burden to school children, obviously, as far as schools or police or fire or otherwise, unlike most other uses, such as the prior residential use that was on the site. And what we've tried to do is to locate the solar facilities in an area that has been previously developed. So we've tried to stay away from the steeper sloped areas and to locate this 2.5 kilowatt tier 3 facility in an area of the site where there'll be least amount of impact. As far as the importance of finding alternative energy, we all are aware that Indian Point is closing January 1, 2021, and that with all of the issues regarding climate change, it's important for us to find a renewable source of energy that helps to address community needs as well. Not everybody can provide solar panels on their roofs sufficient to accommodate their own needs, but these community solar farms accommodate several hundred homes by providing necessary electricity for them. The reason for the reduction in the buffer was so that we stayed away from the solar farm, the steep slope area, I'm sorry. And what we've done is to move further away from the Marsh Sanctuary. We're working with the Marsh Sanctuary. We're going to be granting a license to them for them to be able to hike through a portion of the property that has been leased. As you know, it's a 25-acre site that is the property that's owned by Skull Island. And we have a little under 6 acres that's fenced in, 5.7 acres fenced in for the solar arrays, and then another 1+ acres for the drainage accommodation. I apologize for that sound from my home phone. In reviewing some of the details that have been discussed before, I think it's important to recognize that the panels do not exceed 8 feet in height, so they're relatively low lying. They've been located in an area that's several hundred feet from the nearest residence, and that will be addressed again by Insight in detail. So I think at this point, what I'm going to do is to ask Rich Williams to walk through some of the details of the application with plans, and then I can come back around to focus on other issues, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
So good evening, Rich Williams, Insight Engineering, and I'm going to share my screen, which, if I did correctly, everybody should be looking at an aerial plan of the site. So what we're looking at is our property with our proposed site plan overlaid on top of an aerial image. And just to get everybody oriented, north is actually facing to the right-hand side of the page. You have Stratford Drive, McLean Street, South Bedford Road, which is also Route 172, Sarl Street, and Linden Lane. This is our property within this black line. We do have a small locally regulated wetland in the southeast corner of the site. There's a residential property located off the northeast corner of our property. That's Mr. Petrobono's. We're surrounded by the Marsh Sanctuary to our northwest and west. There's also a small strip that separates us from the Mount Kisco Chase, which belongs to the Marsh Sanctuary here. This parcel here is again part of the Marsh Sanctuary to our south, and here we have the Mount Kisco Chase with Brentwood Court. In total, and the property address is 180 South Bedford Road, and it's a 25-acre parcel in the CD Conservation District zone. We're proposing to construct a solar array on 7.5 acres of the site. As I zoom in, just bear with me for 1 second. As I zoom in, you can see there is an existing driveway off of Route 172, which we're proposing to use. That driveway starts at about elevation 390. We're going to follow the existing driveway, improving it with 2 sets of improvements. The first being adding a series of pull-bys along the driveway, which will allow additional vehicles to pass by should more than one vehicle be on the driveway at a time. We don't expect that to be the case unless there is an emergency condition up on the site, the fire department's called or something like that, which again, we're not anticipating, but we are providing the means for it if it does happen. We're also going to be adding a stormwater collection system along this driveway. Right now, all the water currently runs down the driveway and flows onto Route 172. We're going to be providing a formalized collection and conveyance system, which will discharge into the state's highway system. As we move up the driveway, we're going to end in a hammerhead configuration up at the existing developed portion of the site. Originally, this site was developed with a large estate parcel. You can still see remnants of it of the site. There's roughly a 3-acre pad here that was previously cleared for the estate. Here you can see the rough outline of the original house foundation, some walls, an original barn or garage carriage house, and there were some tennis courts up in this part of the site. We're going to end in a hammerhead configuration. We have been coordinating with the fire department. We understand there's still some additional comments, which we're working through. But at the end of the hammerhead, there's going to be some pull-off and parking for fire department personnel. And again, in case there's ever an emergency, there's also going to be enough room in order for us to, or in order for the fire department to stage at portable ponds if they should need to. It's also adjacent to this hammerhead that we are going to have the switchgear and the transformer, which will service the solar array. Just to pause and talk about the transformer for a moment. The transformer is specified and the terms of it or the size of it are dictated by Con Edison, the service provider. However, just to give everybody an idea of its size and nature and noise, it's similar in size to that of a residential transformer. There's 2 examples of one close by. One's actually at the corner of Stratford Drive and Searle Street here. And there's another one actually located right underneath the Japanese maple at the corner of Stratford Drive and Brentwood. They're the large green boxes that you see typically in residential neighborhoods. Just to give we heard some comments before about noise during the work session, just to give everybody an idea of what the transformer will look like and sound like. It's very similar in nature to those residential transformers. Continuing past the hammerhead, we move into the solar array. Topographically, what's happening on the site, again, we start at 390 at 172. We move up the hill roughly to elevation 490 at the hammerhead. And then the site continues to rise to about 506 in the middle of the array. There is a high point that goes up and above 520 in this portion of the array, and then the site drops back down. While we're talking about the array, you'll see there's a central corridor through here. This is where the inverters are going to be located. This again comes back to that comment we heard about noise. There are 20 inverters that will be located throughout this corridor. They're about every other row to every 3rd row. There's 7 on one side, 13 on the other. And each inverter has a similar fan to a desktop computer. So when we start talking about noise, and we'll provide the board with more information about noise, we're really talking about the equivalent of 20 desktop computers scattered across several hundred feet. So this isn't big, noise, loud equipment, and we just wanted to try and address that as part of this initial presentation. The other thing that you'll note is we have 4 stormwater basins. This is different from our initial submissions, and I'll walk the board through all the submissions we've made and the alternatives and how we arrived at that. Switching plans, I'm now going to move into our landscape plan. It was provided as part of our submission. We did submit a landscape plan in which we're planting 122 shrubs and 69 trees, which include a mixture of shade trees, evergreen trees, and understory trees. The majority of the plantings have been focused around the southern and the eastern perimeter, as well as in the northern portion of our site where our driveway, and it's not shown on this plan, but just off the plan, where our driveway comes in close proximity to the Petrobono property. Also included in our submission is a grading plan. We do have some minor grading throughout the site, namely in this area and this area, which are valleys, and also in the areas of the existing residence. Again, here was the original manor house and some of the walls. In order to correct some of the undulations of topography, this grading is also being performed in order to optimize the angle of the solar array so that we maximize their efficiency. The other aspect of our on-site grading includes the 4 stormwater basins, which I'll talk about stormwater in a few minutes. But what's important to note is with respect to the mass earthwork, or the cuts and fills necessary to achieve the grades on site, the earthworks has been designed to be as close to balance as we can get. And we are essentially balanced with the mass earthwork. We did note in our design submission an 820-yard import. That import is not for mass earthwork. That import is for select materials, things such as gravel for the finished driveway surfaces, additional topsoil in order to create a suitable mixture for the proposed plantings and seed mixtures to establish themselves. So the reason why I make that distinction is normally when we focus on seeker, we're focusing on mass earthwork because we're worried about truck trips in and out of the site and mass hauling operations. That's not the case here. The earthwork's been balanced, and the imports that we have, 820 yards is actually a very minor import for almost any project. And, it'll be over the life of the construction of the project. So we're not talking major truck traffic to come in and out as part of the earthwork operations. Relative to the stormwater, again, we have 4 stormwater basins. The New York State DEC actually has recently issued guidance as it relates to stormwater design of solar arrays. In that guidance, they do specify the parameters with which we're supposed to follow. They've identified several scenarios, scenario 1 being the simplest, scenario 2 being the more rigid with respect to stormwater design. We believe we're scenario 2, providing the more rigid, stormwater design. What the DEC does is it also tells us that if you are a scenario 2 and you are going to provide stormwater, it should be designed in accordance with the specific elements of the design manual. Now that design manual has set practices and set sizing standards in order to achieve not only water quality volume goals, but also water quality goals. So, there were some comments about, did we address water quality? The answer is yes, through the compliance with the stormwater manual, particularly those of the east of Hudson, which has, again, heightened requirements. We're meeting not only stormwater quantity objectives, but also quality objectives. As far as the cleaning of the panels, at most, they're done once a year, if at all. And it's either a biodegradable cleaning agent or just water. And again, we would go back to the New York State's guidance, and they don't identify any special or specific stormwater requirements beyond meeting the design manual. The reason I bring that up is there are specific hotspots for runoff that are identified in the state manual where we do have to do additional stormwater requirements. Solar arrays are not listed as one of them. In addition, as part of our submission package, we have prepared erosion sediment control plans to address the change in land cover during construction and how to protect not only our construction site, but the surrounding areas to make sure that our limits of disturbance stay where we're proposing them, and also that we don't have a water quality issue during construction. Now I'm just gonna, if you bear with me for 1 second, switch sets of drawings because I do wanna walk the board and the public through a little bit of some of the iterations of this plan and how we have walked through changes and design modifications with the board over the past several months that we've been working with you on this application. This here was our initial submission. It did propose approximately 700 trees to be removed. You will see that there's 3 stormwater basins instead of the current 4. And it also did require, at the time, the largest variance we were seeking for that 200-foot buffer that Bill mentioned of 88 feet. one of the first things the board asked is, what would it look like if you didn't ask for a variance from this buffer and came up with a conforming plan? That led to this submission. Again, we still have those same 3 basins, but in order to maintain the buffer, which is shown in blue, we had to expand the array farther to the west and add a 4th stormwater basin. This additional area of disturbance brought the total project disturbance up almost half an acre to 8 acres. It also brought the tree removal up over 800 trees. It was decided not to pursue this alternative, so we made another site plan submission, which was similar to the first, but again, we were still seeking to minimize our development envelope and also minimize the amount of tree removal. This came in at 7.5 acres, and it was just under 700 trees to be removed. Again, the board asked us, I think, to take another look and see if there was more that we could do. Just to take pause for a minute, this was the alternative that required the 73-foot variance that was previously mentioned. But taking another look at things, we made another submission, which is our current site plan. This submission again shows that 200-foot setback, or this plan shows that 200-foot setback. It also shows in red what the CD zone setback would be if we were required to follow that. In our most recent site plan, we revised the stormwater design. You'll see that the 3 basins I previously showed you are now 4 basins. We didn't lose volume. We just relocated the basins farther into the site and found ways to commingle them with the solar array. That allowed us to minimize the disturbance. Again, we're in general round numbers 7.5 acres, and also reduce the amount of trees to be removed. We were able to save over 50 existing trees with this plan. As we talk about trees, I'm now going to turn it over to Jim Bates from Ecological Analysis. He's our environmental consultant, and he's going to walk you through the habitat assessment that we did. So I'm going to stop the share and let Jim take over.
Good evening, everyone. Little backtrack is, as John had stated, we had had several discussions and we had submitted to the board a scope of work for the habitat assessment. It was reviewed. The town's planner, Jan, and I had several discussions and requests were made. And then we went and did basically to date a 2-season survey of the site, both a late winter and spring survey of the vegetation, wildlife, and all those things. We also contacted all the available data from the Marsh Sanctuary and from the different agencies, the state, federal government, at Jan's request. We went on then to look at some of the other things, the invasive species and so forth, and develop the report. And we also looked at a study that had been done for this property approximately 10 years ago, which also included another tree survey that was done. To be kind of brief, we went through everything. There's no protected species, either vegetation-wise or critter-wise, flora or fauna. We did find several invasive species on the property. Marsh Sanctuary also has been reporting that they're having problems with invasive species such as Oriental bittersweet, tree of heaven, and some of the other herbaceous things. As we're going through the project, one of the things that we have discussed is removing a significant amount of the invasive species, especially in the project area. And then the plantings that have been developed by Insight Engineering are all native plantings to help offset that. And we're also looking at other configurations to make sure that we can provide a better, more native plantings, and potentially even with the Marsh Sanctuary. But that's basically what it comes back to is, in essence, there'll be some tree removal, but there's really no habitat removal because this isn't prime habitat for the area. Unless there's any other questions, that's kind of about it.
Rich, do you have anything else you want to present?
Rich, do you have anything else?
No, Bill, I think it's...
Yeah, I just...
Bill, before you go there, one thing, if you could add, the stormwater basins, what will those look like? How will those be planted in the finished condition?
Sure. They're primarily being designed as infiltration basins, which is seen as one of the more beneficial and ideal stormwater practices based on the most recent stormwater regulations. There's a lot of emphasis in stormwater design now being placed on recharging groundwater back into the ground through infiltration. We get very high credit for it. It is considered a green infrastructure practice and will help us meet our green infrastructure objectives under the stormwater regs. So as stormwater basins, they are going to temporarily hold water after storm events, and then they will let the water infiltrate back into the ground and then remain dry until the next storm event. They're typically seeded with specifically designed seed mixes, which take on a meadow type feel and look, which have select species that are tolerant of temporary inundation and dry periods as well.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make reference to a July 2 letter that we submitted to the board, particularly focusing on some secret issues that arose in connection with what we discussed at the last session, and advised the board that we'd learned about, which is this proposal for a potential cell tower adjacent to this project. And I just want to note that in the letter that we submitted, we indicated that while we absolutely recognize the need for cumulative impacts to be analyzed in any analysis under seeker, the action that we're proposing as a solar array farm is separate and apart, totally distinct from any analysis that would need to be done with regard to the cell tower. And that's more fully detailed in that July 2 letter. I know you've received it, and I'm prepared to speak to it, but I don't want to take too much of the time away from public comment. But it is important to recognize that in analyzing the impacts associated with the solar farm, which I touched upon slightly before, but would be potentially traffic, which we think is nominal, stormwater management, which Rich has spoken to some extent, and aesthetics that, Rich, you also have some sightline and visual drawings. At some point you may want to share with the planning board. But ultimately, these issues associated with this solar farm are independent and not inextricably linked to the cell tower in any form or fashion. A decision with regard to this solar farm would not in any way commit the planning board or the village to act one way or another with regard to the cell tower. And I just wanted to make that statement for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Knoll. The board and council and our staff are in receipt of your letter. We have reviewed that. We're also, the board is also in receipt of a memo from council for the board, which we have reviewed. A determination is not going to be made this evening by this board as to the import of the arguments made as it relates to seeker, other than to acknowledge that this board as lead agency under seeker has an obligation to review the impacts of this application and consider the concept of segmentation as it may apply to this project. So we're gonna open this up to the public hearing and to the public for comment in a moment, and take the public comment into consideration before we make a final determination as it relates to environmental determination.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I did hear some reference to the line of sight sections that were prepared. I can bring them up quickly before we open to public comment if you think it will help.
Briefly, just before you do that, just for the benefit of the public, this board did conduct a site visit All the members of the board have been on the property. A number of us, if not all of us, made subsequent visits to the site and have walked the site, very familiar with what's being proposed here. And the site visit was really targeted towards understanding what was being proposed and what potential impact there may be to the surrounding neighbors and community. We did ask the applicant to do some analysis of the view corridors. We were specific in direction as to where we wanted those view studies to be conducted from. And it was informed in large part by the applicant's submission, the topography, and this board's site visit and subsequent discussions about who we needed to look at from a neighbor standpoint with respect to the visibility analysis. So, Rich, just briefly, if you show the locations from which the lines of sight were conducted and presented.
Okay, sharing my screen again. You should now be looking at one of two pages that were provided. The first sheet, we do have a location map here. On this, again, north is up. So here's 172 South Bedford Road, Sarl Street, Stratford Drive, and Brentwood Court. The first cross-section A, starts at Mr. Petrobono's house. We did take some quick measurements at closest point to the transformer. He's about 450 feet away with about 194 feet of woods separating the transformer from his house. Again, you can see the cross-section A with his house modeled, as well as the existing tree canopy to remain. And then the solar array, again, the panel height is fairly low at 7.7 feet. Cross-section B was taken from the closest house across the street on Sarl Street. And cross-section C runs north-south through the solar array down to Rolling Ridge Court. And cross-section D moves from southwest to northeast through the center of the cul-de-sac to Brentwood Court. So I'm going to go to page 2. Here you have cross-section B, which is again the house on Sarl Street. Cross-section C, which was from Rolling Ridge Court. And cross-section D, which was from the cul-de-sac of Brentwood Court. And you can see, the effects of not only the tree canopy, but also the topography and limiting the line of sight to the solar array. What's important to mention about these solar panels as we look at the direction they're facing, they do all contain anti-reflective coating. Just also to touch on cross-section D, as it relates to sound, the nearest inverter in the solar panel array is 650 feet from the closest house on Brentwood Court, and will contain about 350 feet of woods in between it. And again, each inverter is equivalent to about a desktop computer. Okay.
Rich, do you want to also mention that the tree heights shown on those plans are accurate? They were measured with LiDAR.
I think you just covered that. But yes, they were.
Okay. All right, so with that, I'd like to open the public comment period. Peter, we have a list of folks who are interested in commenting on this application.
Yes, Chairman, I have 4 people in attendance, 3 of which have signed up to speak, and I have a couple of comments on Facebook. I was just writing back to the Facebook participants to be patient, that I will get to them in the end. And we could start with the first person. If you're ready, Chairman, Mr. Stephen Waldinger, I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. He's coming up to speak.
Thank you.
I'll bring it to you.
Acting Chair.
With us. Thank you.
Acting Chair, members of the board, good evening. My name is Stephen Waldinger, and I am a member of the Mount Kisco law firm, Shapiro, Gettinger, Waldinger, and Monteleone. We represent the Mount Kisco Chase Homeowners Association. A homeowners association consisting of 86 single-family homes located in Mount Kisco, New York. We're here to raise the association's concerns about the application of SCS. We're interested because several of the homes located within the association abut the northeastern portion of the proposed solar farm. While SCS is seeking approval to construct only a solar farm on approximately 6.47 acres of the 25-acre lot, it represents that the development coverage for the entire project will encompass only 3.3 acres. Its application seeks to gloss over the elephant in the room, or maybe in some cases what we're calling the elephant in the Zoom. It is now clear that since at least June 12, SCS has been aware of a future application to permit a cell tower on the same property. Further, SCS has obtained sufficient information from the future cell tower applicant to include a rendering of its proposed cell tower on a proposed site plan. In addition to the potential environmental impacts on residents of the association, such as potential sound emitted from the solar farm and visibility of the solar farm from several of the homes, it is clear that the planning board's review of the solar farm, without considering the anticipated impacts of a cell tower application at the same time, or any other intended use of the remaining acreage of the property, constitutes segmented review. It is inconsistent with seeker and the town zoning ordinances. Because the construction of a cell tower adjacent to a solar farm may significantly impact the environment, the association is urging the planning board to hold its review of SCS's application in abeyance until the cell tower application is submitted. The association notes that the planning board has failed to make several of SCS's submissions available to the public in a timely fashion. The public notice of this meeting provided that SCS's application and plans would be available for public inspection on its website 10 days prior to tonight's meeting. However, many documents submitted by SCS were available on the village's website for the first time on July 10th, just a few days ago. This failed to provide the public with sufficient notice of the substance of SCS's application and submissions. Additionally, the planning board failed to make other documents it received from SCS available in a timely fashion. The packet of documents uploaded to the village's website on July 10th included a letter from SCS to the planning board that was received on June 12, 2020. This letter notified the planning board that Homeland Towers, another tenant of the subject property, had requested a preliminary meeting with the village concerning its plans to construct a cell tower adjacent to the proposed solar farm. Information contained in this letter is certainly integral to the planning board's review of the solar farm application, and it is concerning that the village did not make this document available to the public before the June 23rd, 2020 meeting at which the board voted to open this public hearing. As the planning board is aware, the purpose of seeker review is to ensure that governmental agencies perform an adequate environmental review, including an evaluation of the nature, type, size, and scope of the proposed action, and an assessment of whether the proposed action has the potential to have a significant environmental impact. The planning board must incorporate environmental considerations directly into its decision-making, and where necessary, modify the requested action so that it mitigates adverse environmental effects. In fulfilling its obligation, the planning board must, 1, identify the relevant areas of environmental concern. 2, take a hard look at those concerns. And 3, make a reasoned elaboration of the basis of its determination. In performing that review, the planning board must not engage in segmented review, which is dividing the environmental review of an action in such a manner that various activities or stages are addressed as though they were independent, unrelated activities. As I trust your counsel will advise you, this kind of review is disfavored because it could result in a decision that involves review of an earlier action that could be practically determinative of a subsequent action. Another risk of segmented review is that the environmental impacts of the entire project cannot be fully evaluated if the planning board engages in independent review of separate acts where the result could be that the combined project does have significant effects on the environment. For the first time, again on July 10th, just 4 days ago, the planning board made available to the public a July 2nd letter from SCS's counsel, Cuddy and Fetter. In the letter, SCS asserts that the planning board can engage in segmented review of the application for the solar farm without reviewing Homeland Tower's planned construction of a cell tower at the same time. That position is flawed for several reasons. First, SCS's position concludes, without any relevant legal support, that the planning board can review its application without considering the cell tower application because these actions are distinctly different, because unrelated entities will be undertaking the two proposed projects. That two separate tenants are looking to use the same property for different projects is irrelevant and not part of the basic test for segmentation outlined in the SECR handbook. Under this test, the review of the solar farm application should not be segmented from the review of the proposed cell tower for the following reasons. 1, the proposed projects are on the same property. 2, the proposed projects share a common impact and when reviewed together would result in potentially significant adverse environmental impacts. 3, the property is owned by the same entity. And 4, the owner is demonstrating a common plan to use the land in a manner that is inconsistent with the community character of the CD district. SCS relies on 2 cases in support of its erroneous conclusion that the review would not be segmented. However, the cases they cite are not supportive of their position. In both the Dunk case and the Matter of Friends of Stamford Home case, which they cite, the respective courts concluded that cumulative review of 2 proposed projects did not have to take place because the locations of the proposed actions were not within the same geographic location. That is not the case here. We are talking about one property with one owner, where the 2 proposed projects are adjacent to each other and will share the same access driveway and potentially the same stormwater management system. In an attempt to gain the planning board's approval of its application without having an application from Homeland Towers, SCS is asking the planning board to speculate as to what the worst case scenario would be so that the planning board could analyze the cumulative impact that both projects would have on the environment. If the planning board were to engage in the type of review proposed by SCS, it would ignore its obligation to take a hard look at the environmental impact of the proposed projects. The only justification offered by SCS for this board not requiring SCS to wait for Homeland Towers application is that doing so would jeopardize the financial feasibility of the project. In short, SCS is urging that this board not do its job because it will cost SCS money. Clearly, permitting the segmented review urged by SCS is contrary to legal authority. In Carras v. Wallace, and I can provide cites subsequent to the meeting, the court concluded that the board's grant of a permit to a developer to build his second building containing a 4-unit apartment house on a 31-acre parcel of land should be annulled where the developer intended to further develop the property but was seeking to do so in piecemeal fashion. The court concluded that the board should have considered, quote, any long-range plan, quote, that the developer had with the parcel. The same result should follow here. Knowing that the owner leased land on the same property to a company intending to build a cell tower adjacent to the solar farm, the planning board is obligated to inquire further about how that planned use of the property in conjunction with the solar farm would cumulatively impact the environment. For example, the planning board should consider the overall impact on the environment, such as the visual impact of both projects in close proximity to residential areas, the impact to the neighborhood from increased noise, light, and activity of the two projects, the increased risk of flooding, fire, and other safety concerns, that additional trees may likely need to be cut down to construct the cell tower. Merely hypothesizing and speculating what environmental impact the cell tower and the solar farm cumulatively would have is insufficient to permit the planning board to move forward with issuing a declaration on SCS's application. Given these considerations, it would be impermissible for the planning board to conclude that a segmented review is warranted, as such a review is only permitted in, quote, special circumstances. And the planning board must provide supporting reasons and demonstrate that such review will be no less protective of the environment. While SCS urges the planning board to undertake segmented review, it does not provide any basis how such a review would be, quote, no less protective, close quote, of the environment. The planning board should be hesitant to undertake such a review where the only supporting reasons offered to it by the applicant is the financial feasibility of the project. And we submit especially where the applicant is the chairman of the planning board. Segmented review should not be permitted merely because SCS claims the proposed cell tower is speculative. That is not the case. Homeland Towers has a lease with the property owner that can be renewed over the course of 45 years. It has requested a meeting with the village to discuss the plans, and Homeland Towers has provided sufficient information to SCS so that SCS could include a sketch of the proposed cell tower on its fire access and potential lease parcel plan recently submitted to the planning board. This is not a speculative project. Clearly, the planning board does not have sufficient information before it regarding the cell tower to enable it to make a reasoned determination as to how constructing the solar farm adjacent to the proposed cell tower on the same property would impact the environment. The planning board just learned where the proposed cell tower might be on the 25-acre site, but there is no information in SCS's application as to how the cell tower would impact the operation of the solar farm. The planning board also does not know how tall the cell tower could be, how many carriers it might accommodate. It does not know whether it will generate traffic. In short, the planning board has no information that would permit it to review the combined environmental impacts of building both the solar farm and the cell tower on the same property. The planning board should not move forward with its secret review until it obtains specific information regarding the cell tower, as well as all intended uses on the remaining acres of the property. Excuse me. Any decision rendered by the planning board without the additional information would result in an impermissible segmented environmental review of the proposed solar farm, because the planning board is well aware that another interested party intends to build a cell tower on the same property. It is likely that the combined use on the same lot for both a cell tower and a solar farm will have significant environmental impacts, and those impacts cannot be considered if the solar farm application is reviewed independently. Regardless of whether a cell tower is intended to be built, the planning board should further investigate the leasehold interest that SCS has in the subject property, as well as the property owner's intended use of those portions of the property that SCS may not have a leasehold interest in. That is because the potential grant of a special use permit to SCS could be affected by the property owner or other lessee's interest in any portion of the land that SCS does not lease from the property owner. To our knowledge, SCS has not submitted a copy of its lease to the planning board or indicated how much of the 25 acres its lease covers, the length of the lease, or any other pertinent details regarding the lease. All of this is relevant. In fact, the memorandum from village planner, Mr. Johansson, dated July 10th, 2020, noted that the boundary of SCS's lease area should be illustrated on the plans. As the planning board is aware, the subject property is zoned as a conservation development district. In order for SCS to obtain approval to build the solar farm, they need to obtain a special use permit under Town Code Section 110-7B2B. A requirement for the special use permit is that the maximum development coverage of the subject lot cannot exceed 35%, and there must be a minimum of 35% open space on the subject lot. While these numbers appear to be currently satisfied with SCS's proposed solar farm, that cannot be said if a cell tower or other structure is erected on the property. If despite the legal risks associated with segmented review, the planning board moves forward with this review and is inclined to grant the application, the association is requesting that the planning board ensure that the preservation of the open space be permanently assured through the filing of covenants and restrictions as outlined in Town Ordinance Section 110-7C9. Putting aside the issues presented by segmented review, the association has further concerns regarding the solar farm. Part 3 of the EAF submitted by SCS does not present the planning board with sufficient information to access and evaluate the extent of the noise that will be emitted from the solar farm, although the full environmental assessment form indicated that there will be a moderate to large impact on noise levels that exceeds established local regulations. Nor does SCS set forth how long construction would last, although they admit that the construction phase would be, quote, noisy. There are numerous homes within the association and in other neighborhoods within close proximity to the proposed solar farm that will likely be impacted by noise. The planning board should require SCS to submit further information regarding the anticipated noise levels from the solar farm and what time of day those noises will be coming from the solar farm. The association has further concerns regarding the line of sight renderings that SCS has submitted. These submissions appear to be arbitrarily rendered to fit the needs of SCS's goal in establishing that the solar farm is not visible from the association. Although the planning board noted at its last meeting that SCS should submit a second sight line from the second floor of the closest residence, I do not think SCS has done this. The renderings SCS submitted only includes one figure taken from the perspective of a home located in the association when there are at least 7 homes potentially impacted. Moreover, the renderings are further inadequate because they do not represent the sight line in winter months when there are no leaves on the trees, resulting in a sight line that shields the solar farm from view within the association. In sum, this is a most unique application. There is a general sentiment that solar energy is beneficial and a positive use of real property. There is increased demand for more reliable cell service. Indeed, our municipal officials and boards may all favor these uses of the property. Finally, there is the reality that this board's chair has an interest in this application. And quite understandably, this board may have a subconscious inclination to favorably view it. However, before this board is one parcel of property. Until July 2nd, SCS did not substantively address that a cell tower is contemplated on this one parcel. Although it did so in a letter dated July 2nd, that letter, along with the voluminous material, was not uploaded to the planning board's website and available to the public until July 10th. In their July 2nd letter, SCS's attorneys seek to convince this board that although both a solar farm and a cell tower are planned for this property, the potential environmental impacts of the cell tower need not be considered at the same time the board considers the potential environmental impacts of the solar farm. That is the legal argument made by SCS's capable attorneys, whose job it is to advocate for SCS and secure from this board the necessary approvals as quickly as possible. And why is speed so important? SCS has made clear this needs to get done quickly so that SCS can secure tax benefits that decrease in 2021. One must wonder, when would a planning board or any other municipal board think it is appropriate to rush to judgment to assist an applicant in achieving maximum financial gain? In contrast to the advocacy of SCS's attorneys, I understand you've been given the legal opinion of Mr. Singleton, whose job it is to safeguard this process, to ensure that it proceeds in accordance with law, and to insulate the village from liability of costly legal challenges, and to assist this board in fulfilling its duty to the community. I trust that his advice is correct. All of the environmental impacts of both the solar farm and the cell tower must be evaluated at the same time to comply with SECR. On behalf of Mount Kisco Chase, I submit to you that SCS's argument that the solar farm and cell tower need not be evaluated together defies logic. It is contrary to the legal requirements of SECR. Perhaps most importantly, it is difficult to imagine how this board, charged with the duty of protecting the environment and acting in a manner consistent with the welfare of this community, can in good conscience review the application before it in a vacuum, giving no consideration whatsoever to the combined potential impacts of both projects on one parcel of land. Thank you.
Can you just turn up the volume for a second? Bear with me, we have another speaker. The next speaker, chairman, is George Coppola.
Do we have it now? Thanks. My name is George Coppola. I live at 5 Brentwood Court. And just to correct the previous speaker, many of the houses that are close to this site plan are on the southwest corner of the site, not the northeast corner. I'm very close to it. My backyard abuts both the sanctuary and this proposed site. But I argue that the choice of this site is ludicrous. You have a residential area and you're putting in a power plant. Now you can call it a solar farm, which is all warm and fuzzy and people think green, but it is in essence a power plant. And I don't relish the fact in the future having to say to a prospective buyer, oh, by the way, you're right next door to a power plant and a cell tower. As far as notification, I can't think of anybody that should have been notified before me. And we heard about this last week. I didn't hear about the cell tower until today. At any rate, I don't think this is environmentally sound. You talk about felling 700 trees. That's a grotesque environmental insult to a wooded area. I don't understand how you can just pass that off as being, oh, so what? You talk about putting plantings in. I doubt that the plantings you would put in would amount to even 1% of the biomass that you're taking down. That's an unrecoverable ecological insult. Secondly, the sanctuary is adjacent to this site. The habitat loss is enormous. And though there aren't any protected species, oh, let's see, maybe 2 or 3 dozen birds, I'm not gonna read the list, 2 or 3 dozen birds visit my property every day. They trespass every day. They don't respect the boundaries, I guess. So you have habitat loss right next to a sanctuary, a nature preserve. How can you do that? That's an insane site choice. Third thing is just simply zoning and the purpose of zoning. Why do you have zoning? So that things stay the same. We as residents count on zoning so that things stay the same. If you're just going to allow exceptions every time a slick presentation is made, then why have zoning at all? There are a lot of other places you could put a solar farm. In commercial areas, you have parking lots. You could make covered parking with the solar panel. You have vast expanses of flat roofs of the stores themselves. Put the solar panels there. You have mowed lawn on the expressways, on all the entrance and exit ramps. Put them there. Instead of having another environmental impact like cutting the trees, why don't you put it somewhere where you've already had the impact and make it do double duty? This is just a poor choice of a site, period. And I don't understand all the arguments about impacts as if it's going to go on this site no matter what. We feel railroaded at this point. At any rate, I encourage the board to think about this and to protect the residents of the community. We have to suffer the environmental impact. We have to suffer the detrimental financial position of having lower home values. We come first, not some outside company. That's the only green part of this is what will line the pockets of individuals who don't live here. Think about what you're doing before you decide to approve or not of this application. Thank you.
Vice Chair, have two more speakers. Just bear with me. I'll bring them up.
Thank you.
Oh, give me your address, please. 5 Brentwood Court. 5 Brentwood Court? Yeah. Thank you. Here we have John Rose that would like to say a few words.
Good evening. I know there's some other people who wish to speak on this matter, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief. We will be submitting, the CAC will be submitting a quite lengthy analysis and report on the latest submission. What I'll do is just try to summarize some of the key points from that. Of course, we share many of the concerns of Mr. Waldinger, Mr. Coppola, and the other residents at the Chase in this matter. The Mount Kisco Conservation Advisory Council supports the construction of a solar farm on the above referenced property, but only if every possible attempt is made to minimize the negative environmental impacts of that development. And I don't think that's actually been done so far in the as we've seen in terms of this application. We appreciate that since the first submission, the applicant has made substantial modifications in the plan, but we still feel that there's really too many heavy environmental impacts, and I'll summarize those. The key thing here is that this is a conservation district. And last year, the village board changed the zoning, the town zoning code, to allow for solar installations in the CD district, but with very strict limitations. And those limitations were debated for months. And most of you remember that. I know the applicant was involved in that debate, as were many of you. And after all of that, the village board came up with a 200-foot buffer as being the minimum that could be allowed, that should be allowed when a solar farm is put in a CD district. Even with the modified application that we saw most recently, is still they're asking for 1/3 of that buffer, excuse me, to be eliminated. That's 72 feet out of 200 feet. And that buffer actually to be eliminated in area closest to residential areas. So part of our recommendation is that the board only allow this application if the full 200-foot buffers are allowed. Again, as Mr. Waldinger said, the only reason not to do that really is so that the installation can be more profitable. If installation has to be smaller, in order to fit in those boundaries and to respect the steep slopes, then maybe that's what has to be done. The board may have to ask the applicant to do that. So some of the other specific concerns that we have in terms of trees, Mr. Coppola spoke very eloquently about the trees in this area, and they really are, quite magnificent. This area was the estate of Judge Leonard previously, and had, I believe that in the tree survey that was done, that was referenced before, was done about 10 years ago, there was a specific delineation of what we call specimen trees. And there were approximately 1,000 of those on the property at that time. For those of you who don't know, and I'm sure most of the members of the board know this, specimen trees are trees that are delineated in our town code that have special protection. These are generally trees that are well over 30 inches in diameter. Most of them are over 100 years in age, and they're not just beautiful. These specimen trees. Actually, they're referred to by many forestry experts as mother trees, and the reason for that is that they provide actual nourishment for younger trees in the area. They provide habitat, for many of the animals that live in the area, and as a matter of fact, they play a very important role in the entire ecosystem, including the extremely important for flood management, flood prevention. Each one of these trees basically handles something like, I believe it's 40,000 gallons, 40,000 gallons a year, I believe is the figure for in terms of transpiration. So they're very important. Now, one problem that we had, and we discussed this at length with this application, was that at least as of the latest version that we saw, and maybe we missed this, there is no specific delineation of how many of these specimen trees are going to be removed. And these are the trees that form the canopy that Mount Kisco is so famous for. We think that we should know exactly how many of these trees will be removed according to each of the variations of the plan, and that none of them be removed if they're on steep slopes or very steep slopes. And there is an application for steep slopes and very steep slopes permit. I think the board should look at that very, very closely, because along with the buffers that I talked about before and that were talked about by the other speakers, the steep slopes are also something that we call, well, the application for a steep slope permit and for the relief from the buffers are what are usually referred to as a self-inflicted hardship. The applicant is very familiar with this property and with the new laws governing the installation of solar farms on CD property. And both of them were very specifically designed by the village board after much debate to protect the natural value of these properties. So if you know that a property has these limitations in terms of very steep slopes, in terms of buffers that are specified, and then you come and you say, well, we want relief from these, that's really a self-inflicted hardship, because this was not, and in terms of the owner of the property, the owner bought this property before solar farms were allowed. So they can't say, well, we want to build a solar farm, that's why we bought the property. That's not the case at all. So that issue of the self-inflicted hardship is important. One thing that is critical importance to us was the issue of the cell tower. And it's not just because there would be a cell tower here and it would affect the property values and the viewscape of the people in all the adjoining properties. I mean, that's important, but it's also important for us because of this issue of segmentation. we feel that the CD property with the 35% set aside for wild, for open space is a critical part of the zoning. And if you allow this kind of segmentation, you could approve a particular use, and then they'd want to put a cell tower, and then they'd want to put a 7-Eleven, and then they'd want to put something else. And this would go on and on. And basically, at this point, you don't even have from the applicant what is required by the law in town by, I believe it was mentioned also before, 110(7)(c)(9), the open space requirement for CD zones. And it requires that the village board approve a plan to preserve this 35% of the property as open space in perpetuity. So this is not a passing thing, and this is not a light matter. They have to approve conservation easements. They have to approve a conservation plan and so on. We haven't even seen this conservation plan, but now we've seen a cell tower that's going to be added, which is of course going to impact that in terms of line of sight and many other things. So we feel that before this moves forward, we should also see this open space plan both from the leasee and the owner, and that this should, as is required by the law, be examined by the village board. I mean, this is not my opinion. This is the law of the town. The other things that we were concerned about was the whole idea of notification. I know that very difficult times now, communications is difficult. There are many limitations, but the notifications of this project, of this hearing, have been not optimal. Let me put it that way. It was said in the affidavit of postings that notices were posted at 6 different locations in town. I went to a couple of those locations. I didn't see them. I even asked the people in the library. This library is listed as a location where a notification of this hearing was posted. I asked the staff in the library, was anything ever posted here? And they said no. So I don't know how you could have somebody give an affidavit that something was posted when apparently it wasn't. I was talking yesterday about this location and this project. One of the people in Bedford, at our counterpart there at the CAB there, called me up and said, what's going on about this project? We just heard about it through the grapevine. And they talked to their director of planning, they talked to other people in the town government, and apparently, at least according to what they told me, they haven't received an official notification of this, which they're required to do under the secret regulations. And so, there's a lot of loose ends here, which seem generally to be evident of rushing the process. The segmentation issue, the notification issue, and various others. So basically, just to summarize very quickly, and we'll give you the full report on this in writing. We recommend that until the village board until the planning board, that this hearing be extended or postponed, and that a determination be postponed until these serious procedural and substantive issues raised by us and by other people have been resolved. And these issues include, but not limited to, a notification and participation of neighbors in neighboring jurisdictions, the issue of segmentation, the lack of an NRI report, which is something, again, that we've informed the board about before. The village law requires, and I'll give you the chapter and verse on it, requires in 75A-4 that any project requiring a secret determination that an NRI report on the impact of this application on the NRI, our natural resources inventory, which is incorporated in the town law now, that be prepared. We asked the board about this in a letter. I guess it was over a month ago. Heard nothing about it. Now they're moving to approve the application. And now I appreciate that there was a biodiversity study done, and that's very good. And from what I've seen, that was done very competently. But that's not the same as the impact on the NRI. The NRI went into over several years the various ecological services that are involved in these different properties around town. And it's not a very onerous thing. It basically means that somebody from the applicant's farm, and the applicant's very familiar with this NRI, has to just take their plans and compare them to the NRI and see if there are any according to the NRI. And this is something that is required by the village law. So there are a number of these loose ends, and it seems like, and I understand, the issue with the tax advantages and so on, but it seems like this is going to have a permanent impact on one of the few areas, privately held areas of open space in the town, and it's important that it be done right. And so we're urging you to basically delay this determination until all those loose ends have been tied up. Thank you for your time.
All right, Chairman, I have another speaker, Mr. Rex Pietrobono. Apologize if I mispronounce your name. And we have a couple of others that would like to participate via Zoom that are in the waiting room, and we have a couple of Facebook messages thereafter. So, Rex.
Hi. Members of the board, thank you for taking the time to listen to the members of the public and hear some input. I sent the board an email on Friday, and if you read it, you see that I've been trying very hard to work with the applicant and in a way that we could reach an agreement on interest so that we could, somehow the project could go forward for the solar farm. I tried hard. I met with the applicant and an associate. We went for a site visit. We walked around the site. I'm the property, by the way, which is outlined around on that big map with the peninsula on the corner of Sorrel Street 172. So, I'm fully familiar with that area. We've been there since 1997. Walked the property a lot, and we walk our property a lot. It's an unusual shaped property, and we have a path that runs basically all around the border of it. So not only do we see our property, we see the property next door. So we always observe, people going up there or wildlife and just the landscape itself. So it's not easy to try to support something that's going to basically, it's like a paradigm shift on the top of the hill. It's going to be I sent you a picture of what used to be there. It was a mansion. It's a beautiful mansion, a single family mansion at the top of the hill. That was taken down. There was some proposals for development there for homes. I don't know the numbers, 24, 12, 8, 6, whatever it is. And then and I believe that one of the owners was looking at putting in just a single family home again, sort of to restore the place to its previous beauty, somewhat manicured. As it is now, it's sort of resumed its natural state to a large extent with some of the overgrowth that's mentioned, the invasive species and things. They take over, any tree that tries to grow, they get choked out by vines and things like that. But in some of the areas that was devastated by some tree loss and the stumps were left down, even that's a better view to see green all over the stumps than just the stumps. Anyway, so I sent my memo in Friday based upon what I believe were all the good faith efforts made. I know certainly on my part, trying to acquiesce some points that I naturally didn't want to agree with, but in the spirit of trying to work with the new neighbor, as long as they were willing to give me a lot of the screening, and we did walk the area, and they showed me what they would propose as some screening areas. Now looks quite limited because yesterday about 3:40 p.m. is when I found out that up until this point, a cell tower had been concealed from me. That you know, that there has been a plan to install a cell tower is specifically where I walked with the applicant and they pointed out the stakes in the ground, the survey stakes, and described what would be where: the gate, the fence, first water basin, maybe a little pad for future use, things like that. And I said, you know, thanks for showing me this. It's possible this could work because of the way it's set up. All of this disturbance outside of the fence was going to be on the west side of their driveway. That's basically the inside of the driveway. So nothing, I was assured there was nothing going on east of the driveway, only west of the driveway, which was going to be mounted also to, in addition to the basin, they said they probably, I think they had to put in a gravel parking area in case sort of some fire trucks are gonna have to park there. And so up some code. So I specifically said this could work for us because if you don't disturb anything on the east side, that is some natural screening. It's deciduous trees, so you need a lot of them. And they're tall, and they've been there a long time, and it's a beautiful area, and there's also a stone outcropping at the top of the hill. And this is all on the outside of the fence, on the east side of the project. So, you know, I'm looking back at it, it was very disingenuous to describe everything, the project like that, ignoring, you know, as was mentioned, the elephant in the room, I mean, a tower. I mean, and I have to go in just a bit of a random order on issues because I just found out about this yesterday. There's no real preparation. I spent all my time writing that email to you. So just some of the topics brought up. First, you know, I would join in Mr. Waldinger's, you know, fine application that the entire project must be evaluated together. I mean, you know, he hit on it's inconsistent, the segmenting of this, that this is like, oh, no, there's the solar farm, and that's, you know, don't look over here, folks. Keep moving. There's nothing going on over here. Okay. Yeah. So, you know, yeah, they're gonna put in then a tower, and then since apparently from what I'm hearing, they haven't even submitted their lease, so we don't know what else is proposed. If they're willing to conceal a cell tower on a solar farm project, I mean, what else could there be? I think it's a fundamental first stage analysis is to take a look at that lease and see what property do they have? What does somebody else hold? It's just absolutely fundamental. So while Mr. Waldinger, you know, touched on how it's inconsistent with seeker and local laws, I agree with him. You know, he did a beautiful explanation of that. You have to add, I mean, just add common sense to it, all right? That's the part I can add because I live right next door. Nobody, this is, as also was mentioned by Mr. Coppola, this is a residential neighborhood. I mean, it's one thing if we can all disagree or agree if you want a solar farm. If it was done right, you know, if it's done right, I'm willing to work with them. But they basically just killed the deal, as far as I'm concerned, by not disclosing previously the overall plan, you know? This basically segmenting it. And not only they segment it, they try to justify it too, which is like absurd to me. I mean, I get advocacy when that's what you're hired for, but I mean, really, it just flies in the face of logic and the laws. This is surrounded by residential neighborhoods, the Chase, you got Marsh and people that visit Marsh. You got myself, you got Nancy El Buhali on the hill. You have other homes around the corner. You got people driving by, people jog on Sorrel Street, they ride bikes because it's so beautiful. And whatever you're talking about doing here is forever. Effectively, it's forever. You're gonna wipe out the top of the hill, you can install solar panels. When is that gonna ever stop? It's a 45-year lease. You can always renew the leases, and who knows what's going to happen in 45 years. It'll be hologram technology. I don't even know. So something's going to always go on up there. It's not going to be restored. Same thing if you add a cell tower. I mean, how absurd. And, you know, in all fairness, if they were to put this, I mean, if they're boxing in this board by not just trying to separate it, because they're going to build this whole solar farm, then they're going to come in and say, hey, listen, we want to put in a cell tower, and you know the laws are in our favor, and you can't stop us, and this is the only spot that it can go in, which is completely offensive to at least my property and anyone on Sorrel Street. And one of the selling points on the solar farm project I heard from counsel for the applicant is that these solar panels, they will not be more than 8 feet tall. So you're not going to see them. Don't worry about it. I mean, is the cell tower more than 8 feet tall? I mean, think about it, really. We're all supposed to be, I'm fine with, it's fine for this purpose, but not for this purpose. Ignore the fact that we're going to put a tower over 100 feet tall with blinking lights on it. You know, it's going to be imposing over the tree canopy, particularly for my property, because where it's proposed is just to try to get away from one neighborhood, and it comes into my neighborhood. So it's not looking at the overall project and saying, this is the best location, which I said, if they ever had to put one in, it'd just be in the center of the top of the hill, just north of where the fence would be. Now, the only way that can be done is if they do it, not the only way, but the easiest way to do it is if you look at the entire project and you say, we're going to have to put this here because that's best for everybody. This is like a fowl sandwich that everyone has to take a bite. Everyone has to take an equal bite. Not just me on my side or Sorrel Street people, and not over on Marsh and not on the Chase. It's got to be put in some place, and it has to be evaluated. What's the best spot for this? That's a political decision to try to appease someone and then incur the wrath of somebody else. I mean, my family's going to have this house. My family, we brought everyone up. We try to improve that property all the time. And, you know, these guys come in and they want to, oh, listen, we want to put in a farm. And, oh, by the way, yeah. But down the road, it's separate from us, but we want, there's going to be a cell tower, but it's got nothing to do with us. Well, I'd like to see that. I mean, let's take a look at the lease if it's got nothing to do with you. It shows up on a plan that's submitted, it's public on Friday. It coincided with my submission of my memo to you. So please understand, I was completely unaware of the proposed cell tower at the time I wrote you that. So none of us want to be looking up at the night sky where we presently see stars and have to see some alien tripod from War of the Worlds glaring back at us. And it's just not fair. This is not an application out of necessity. There's somebody who's lived up there and they have to make some change to the property and like asking if we can help them make some change. This is strictly for profit, I was pointed out. This is trying to maximize profit on a property, 25-acre parcel, beautiful property. And we're supposed to just say, fine, go max it out, segment it, do the solar farm, do the cell tower. And then when the carnival they want to build down there comes up, then, well, that's separate also from everything else because it's on the lower half of the property. And again, I'm being facetious on that. I have no idea that that's anything in the works like that. I'm just saying we don't know, and we're left to speculate, which is not fair when you're talking about forever and really impacting you people. You're talking about moving a mildly impactful application that has been clandestinely expanded to one with a significant and substantial impact. And it has to be reviewed in its entirety. I mean, come on. You know, we rely on you people to do the work for the village, and for every one of us, we all have our rights. And we're just certainly hopeful that you will actually look at that and consider that. I know that we work with the chairman, nice guy, I like him too, but I'm looking at this application and it's just flawed now. It's completely flawed. They are inseparable, they are intertwined. You cannot just say, build one and ignore the other. And then, oh yeah, by the way, yeah, now build that one and you're boxed in, you were trapped, and you're gonna have to approve it in the only location that they decided on what basis? To be away from everyone else. That's what I know. That's what the applicants said. Yeah, so they can deny it from the site. On some other issues, I did ask for, prior to knowing this, about some additional screening. If you ever get back to that point, for my property, there's some gaps. I specifically know the areas where the trees were knocked down in the storm and they've never been replaced. If you put screening up, you'll help screen it from 172. You screen it from me, I'd appreciate it. So I don't have to see certain areas of the driveway, but I also don't want them to remove. Some of their proposals is to expand that driveway by cutting into like what, the 1 yard between us. When they have unlimited space on the other side, they could go out 6-8 feet. You don't have to cut this way, because if they do that, they're cutting out my existing screening that protects 70% of my view of that property. Now they're going to put in 30%, but they're all talking about removing some of that 70%. And I don't even know what they're going to do. Just leave that alone and move outward. And this the water basins, I don't know what the effect that's going to be on the water table, because historically, going all the way back to that mansion I mentioned, I saw a picture of it. It shows there's this ravine at the top of the hill that was used to capture the water apparently and disperse it, I guess, as best they could with that technology then. And then some of it would run down the driveway, but then when it hit that sharp turn, it would run off into a wooded area between my property and the marsh and disappear, probably into the water table, which is good as long as there's no chemicals up top, which I was assured, but now I want you to confirm there's no chemicals cleaning these things, these solar panels, and they're not using a well to generate the water to clean these things, and that whatever comes off those, comes running down the hill, doesn't get into the water table. And with all these basins, they look very, very efficient of capturing all the water, and then they said they're going to send it out to 172. So I just have a question. What is that going to do to the replenishing of the water table that has been occurring naturally? We're on a well. We've never had a problem with the water coming in. I would just hate to see somehow this project happens and now my well has gone dry. There's no water hookup anywhere. So I don't know what the answer is. I'm concerned that once you start changing something that works, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. They also propose running a power cable on the driveway. In part of that cut, I said that 1 yard or 2 yards toward my property, the boundary. They want to sink the power line that runs and pops up next to my property and up a pole and connects to 172. I mean, is that really the best location to connect, their outgoing electricity to Con Ed? Can it go on Sorrel Street? Or if it has to go there, there's a whole stretch down there between the entrance and my property. It doesn't have to be right next to it. And I feel more comfortable when I walk on that little perimeter of my property I mentioned, or my daughters are jogging on it or walking on it, that there isn't, I don't know, some kind of malfunction with a power cable underground with the water that's collecting there. I don't know. Can't they put it on the other side of the driveway and they come around and down through the peninsula and then just shoot out from there? I'd rather see it somewhere else. And just another point, the habitat. Someone mentioned the natural habitat and the birds. I'm so glad someone else loves the birds. There's beautiful birds around there and they're taking away those trees. I get it. And I don't know I don't know what's going to happen with those, but I can tell you there's also a lot of ground wildlife in addition to deers. But what's proposed, and one of the problems I have is this buffer is, what the hell's the point of a buffer if you're going to build in it? So they put a fence is going through this buffer it's so close to the cliff, there's nowhere for the herds of deer or whatever else is coming through that go up, across our property and up the hill. They're going to hit this fence and they're going to have to go the long way around? I mean, can't it, if the buffer was enforced, they could go straight past that and go down toward the marsh area again, the marsh sanctuary, and into the marsh behind the marsh sanctuary. I mean, that encroachment in the buffer completely blocks the animals from accessing egress and ingress and egress both ways. That's, I mean, once you break one rule, it just kind of snowballs. And that's, speaking of snowballs, that's again back with that cell tower. Trying to get this snowball rolling so when it finally comes up, you step in front of it, you're going to get plowed over. You have to look at the whole project in its entirety. It's not fair to segment. It's prescribed. Certainly there's advocates on both sides of it, but in this situation, you have to decide if it's what's applicable. Does it make sense to you to just completely commercialize the top of a mountain that's completely bucolic for profit only? Maximum profit. I say no. Thank you.
Chairman, just bear with me. We now have a couple of speakers that are going to participate via Zoom. We're going to allow them in one at a time. And you let me know when you're ready.
Go ahead.
Okay. We have Simon with us. Simon needs to unmute and you're ready to go.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm actually calling, my full name is Simon Skolnick, and I'm calling in my capacity as the chairman of the Town of Bedford Conservation Board. I sent a letter to the Mount Kisco Planning Board late this afternoon. It's a short letter, and I'd like to read it and have it put into the record. It's addressed to Mount Kisco Planning Board regarding the SCS Sorrel Street, 180 South Bedford Road, PB 2020-0395, SBL 80.44-1-1 site plan. Dear Planning Board Vice Chairman Ben Lardy and Planning Board members, I write to you as the chairman of the Bedford Conservation Board in regard to the public hearing on the SCS Sorrels 180 South Bedford Road Community Solar Farm application to be held on Tuesday, July 14th, 2020. In our capacity as an advisory board to the Bedford Town Board, its departments, commissions, and boards, we are requesting that the Mount Kisco Planning Board withhold any action on the above referenced project until the Town of Bedford has had the opportunity to review the application documents, visit the site, and present to you our comments. As part of this request, we ask that the Bedford Planning Board, among other applicable boards and commissions, be given the responsibilities of an interested party in this application. This request is based on the State Environmental Quality Review Act, whose handbook 4th edition 2020 states on page 172 that a municipal board must consider extraterritorial environmental impacts occurring in an adjoining municipality. The application located along Sorrel Street directly abuts the Town of Bedford. We believe that this application contains such environmental impacts on our town to warrant this request. As is the protocol for communications received by your board, we request that this letter be read aloud at tonight's meeting, public hearing, and be entered into the public record. Respectfully submitted, Simon Skolnick, Chairman. It's also copied to J. Osterman, Bedford Planning Director, and E. Gordon, Bedford Town Attorney. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello.
Chairman, we have John S. next.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. It's John Stockbridge, actually. So if you see that other box down there, that's a double header. And I apologize for that. And I want to compliment my friend, Mr. Skolnick, for his very, very short presentation. That made me feel very good because it was to the point, and it was, I think, it was excellent. I think as a board member of the Mars Sanctuary and a resident of Sorrel Street, I think we're definitely qualified to comment. I think as Sanctuary has been there for several generations at least, and I think provided Mount Kisco for a nice resource, whether it's from accessing through Leonard Park or whether it's coming up from Byram Lake Road or whether it's going in through Sorrel Street to the community garden and the pond there and the the two buildings and the stable. I mean, we've provided, I think, for ourselves and for the village, a resource. And we've been cautious, but okay with the fact that that land, the 25-acre piece there, has not been built on. We remember very clearly when the applications were for multiple houses, and then we had a situation where the town was able to turn that down, and then the property has exchanged hands. But now, when this one came up, I think what we were, the positives were thinking, okay, rather than a communion of houses up there, community of houses, to have something that's green energy is complementary to what the sanctuary thinks. And we got a tour, and I believe it was from Doug Hertz for going through the property and looking at what other people said they have seen about the grid of solar panels and where our trail would be protected and things like that. And frankly, we were saying, okay, it could be worse. And the things we didn't think about at the moment really were the noise that might come off it, perhaps the water running down. I think Mr. Williams talked about the water coming down the widened driveway. Well, guess where it goes? It goes right into that joint driveway, which goes into the Kisco River, right there where it comes off 172, falls in there, and we have a perpetual problem with trying to keep that clean. The water coming off 172, plus if we're now coming down from solar panels property, that would be something that has to be worked out. There's no question about that. And the Brookside Cottage there, which has a ton of history, needs to be protected from that as well. I think that some of the main things to consider are, and I must say that the general feeling is when you know something's wrong, you don't do it. And I think that what I was surprised at is, even though I think Michelle Russo gave me the answer that the list went out to notify people in the area, but I think it went out a little bit late and perhaps we didn't get enough information. And some of the information I've been able to dig out has basically talked about the fact that there was this lease done last year, November 19, that was between Homeland Towers and I guess Skolon and Partners, which is not mentioned at all. When we had our tour, it's the same thing I think that Mr. Petrobono said, or the Mount Kisco Chase attorney said, that there wasn't any clear statement of what also could be there. And it seems to me very logical, or that these two go together as a concept, because if you're the owner of the property, I mean, you want to maximize your potential revenue. And I think that that's exactly what the thought process of what I hope they weren't trying to fool the planning board by saying, okay, give us the solar farm. And, oh, by the way, now we have a application on the same property, which we can show you the lease on, the lease agreement. It's all legal and everything's fine for a cell tower. So that was a little bit disingenuous, I thought, as to what the presentation was made to the planning board. I think the planning board was sort of being taken advantage of. From the standpoint of the Marsh Sanctuary, if you go up the trail, go up from the Sorrel Street entrance and go up the trail and look back at the pond and the community garden, which has been set up for the village. If you look back the other way, you're going to be looking smack at a cell tower. No question about it. I can send you pictures that are so beautiful looking from that hill down across the pond. And this is something that people now, you may notice, more people are using the sanctuary than you would have seen before. And I don't think it's just COVID related. I think more people have been going there. And you've got rewilding program for the kids. They're all getting involved with it. And so to disturb that in any way, whether it be noise from transformers or whether it be the very, very difficult visual of a cell tower, or it be damage to wildlife or water runoff, every one of these things does not work for the sanctuary. We wrote a letter trying to be, basically okay, supportive, but not obviously enthusiastic, but okay kind of thing. And then we found out about this property thing with the cell tower. And I must say, speaking for the other board members, we have to withdraw our comments to be okay with the project, with the solar project, because it now has too many threats to it. So I think that if you're having the Marsh Sanctuary there as a passive acceptor of the solar project, you can take that off. We've learned too much about what the property really is about, and it's just not right. And I think that what I'd like to have the board consider really is the importance of the Marsh Sanctuary to the neighborhood. I mean, I really do think if you haven't walked the property yourself, or you haven't gone down the trails or that kind of thing, and you aren't part of the community garden, and you haven't stepped into the amphitheater at Brookside, I mean, all these things don't have to be there, but they are, and they're part of our history. And I think that I really would like the planning board to say, okay, guys, you know what? This is the wrong place for this. This is just not what should be happening here. Very tough thing to do for a board to turn down a project. I think some of the other speakers have talked about is making sure that if the two pieces of action, if you will, are owned by the same party, and if they are just not being applied to at the same time, applied for, that's wrong. Planning board has to say, wait a minute, let's look at the overall concept here, guys. This is not, we get the solar panel put together and we work with them. Now, all of a sudden, here comes the application for a cell tower. And just like the cell tower was turned down on the other side of the Marsh Sanctuary by the water tower a couple of years ago, that was done. I was very impressed. That was done for the right reason. And I think Mount Kisco should be complimented on that. And in like manner, I think I'd like to have you use the same resources and say, guys, this is the wrong activity in the wrong place. And we very much want to do the right thing. And you've got a lot of residents and stuff that didn't get enough information in time. But I think we're all, agreed on the fact that we have an important part of Mount Kisco, and it does border Bedford. And it's, I would like to see you guys do the right thing. So thank you.
Okay, Chairman. We're waiting on one or two others on Zoom. They indicated they want to speak, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to Facebook now. If you don't mind, if I can switch while we're waiting for the participants. Please. Okay. Trying to manage four different mediums here. Let me finish on Facebook. Wait. Okay, so I have a message on Facebook from Amy Dannon Lerner. In your executive session prior to the public hearing, you mentioned the Mount Kisco Chase HOA was on the notification list. I don't believe anyone on the HOA board was notified. If you did contact someone on the board, who was it? We found out from a third party about the proposal. I don't have to answer that question, but we could certainly look into who was notified. We have a list of people that were notified. We could confirm the people that were notified, Chairman. The second message is from Beth Romsky. Says, please note that you have failed to reference a number of other emails from your individual homeowners in the Chase that were submitted. In addition, you have also ignored the letter from the HOA. Okay.
We did receive a letter from the HOA asking, well, actually for counsel for the HOA, asking to be added to the public comment and given an process and being given an opportunity to appear and make his presentation, which he did tonight. Before we move on, just want to make a couple of brief comments. We're not going to get into tonight specifics about the substance of any particular comment. What should be noted is that this board has received these comments this evening. These comments will be taken into consideration by the board and its consultants, and the applicant will be required to respond to any substantive comments that have been made tonight. With respect to the notice requirements, this is an issue that comes up at very many of the public hearings, particularly with respect to matters that the use may be considered objectionable by some neighbors. There's a clear code requirements for what the applicant is obligated to do with respect to providing notice. And it is the intention of this board to ensure that the applicant abides by the law. We will definitely take a second look to see if there was any missteps in whether or not anyone who should have been noticed was not, and we'll address that. But I think that the fact that you have a number of people who did show up tonight, that the word is out. Clearly, the applicant has been engaged with its immediate neighbors, including Mr. Petrobono and the Moore Sanctuary and others. Also, just to note that these meetings, while not every meeting is a publicly noticed meeting, are.
So we have enough notice, Mr. Skolnick, as well. Thank you.
Yep. So anyone who's listening tonight, there will not be a second notice that goes out for a continuation of a public hearing. So anyone who is aware of this public hearing should be aware that until this public hearing is officially closed by this board, it will continue. And when it is closed, it will likely be held open for some period of time for any additional written public comment. But there will not be additional notice sent out for a continuance of the public hearing. If, as council had mentioned, if it turns out that we missed someone who should have been legally noticed who is not, that will have to be remedied.
Mr. Chairman, I just would ask that if the board, I think it would be appropriate for the board to state that the hearing is being continued to August 11th. And Whitney, I leave that to you and Jan.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Bill. Could you speak up?
Yeah, I thought that it would be appropriate for the board to determine that the hearing is being continued to August 11th.
I think that's what the chairman just said, and that I'm sure that they'll vote on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually, so we could.
I'm sorry, John, can I just say something?
Yes.
By virtue of the fact that I'm saying that we will look into the notice, I'm not saying that it was insufficient. I know that we had long conversations with the applicant relative to providing additional notice, given the fact that he was next to a residential subdivision, and given the fact that the particular location. And my recollection was that the applicant had intended upon providing that additional notice. And certainly there's a number of names on the list that were included here, but I'm assuming that based upon the affidavit of their of the mailing that they went out, that does not necessarily mean that people receive them. And since we no longer require certified mailings, there's a little bit of a gap in there. So we will make sure that that appropriate mailings went out and the appropriate notice has been performed. But I did want to point out that the applicant did indicate a desire to go over and above in that regard.
Yeah, understood. And we have no reason to believe that it's not sufficient notice or adequate notice was provided, but we're going to double check. Okay. So we need to vote as a board to adjourn the to keep the public hearing open.
Yes.
Okay. So what I have, I'll make the motion that we continue the public hearing at the next available meeting in August.
Could you specify the date, please?
Was that August 11th?
Yes.
August 11th. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Michelle?
Vice Chair Benlardi.
Aye.
Mr. Vigliotti.
Aye.
Ms. Pickard.
Aye.
Mr. Bonfort.
Aye.
Mr. Palessi.
Aye.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
We missed Mr. Hochstein. John, did you vote?
Yeah, aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we still have a couple of matters left on the agenda, so I'll turn it back to Chairman Hertz.
All right. So we have 3 discussion items on the agenda. We'll take the 2 extensions first. We discussed them in our work session. The first is an extension for Dandelion Energy for Kirsten Cole, 12 Greeley Avenue, request for extension. This was, if you all remember, this was an application and approval for a geothermal system, which we approved after significant discussion. So given COVID, given the extenuating circumstances of the last few months, I think many of us can feel no real reason why we shouldn't give extensions because everything has been messed up. So unless there's discussion on the board, Whitney, do we need a motion for that?
Yes.
We do. Okay.
Your board needs to approve them, yeah.
All right. So I will make the motion that we give a 6-month extension to the application PB 2019-0388, Dandelion Energy for Kirsten Cole. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Benlardi. Any discussion? Hearing none. Michelle, would you pull the board?
Chairman Hertz,
Aye.
Vice Chair Benlardi,
Aye.
Ms. Pickard,
Aye.
Mr. Hochstein,
Aye.
Mr. Vigliotti,
Aye.
Mr. Bonfort,
Aye.
Mr. Pelesi.
Aye.
Thank you. The next discussion matter is also a request for extension, Pat Cambreri, 183-/191 Main Street. This is PB 2017-0341. Using the same argument, this is something that we had approved. Again, there being no coherent argument for us not to grant extensions in this extraordinary moment, I will make the motion that we grant a 6-month extension for that approval. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. Michelle, would you pull the board?
Chairman Hertz,
Aye.
Mr. Pelesi,
Aye.
Ms. Pickard,
Aye.
Mr. Hochstein,
Aye.
Mr. Vigliotti,
Aye.
Mr. Bonfort,
Aye.
Vice Chair Benlardi.
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. The last item is an amendment to local law 110. It's a 2020 zoning map amendment, and I'm going to ask Jan to take us through that. I believe after discussion in the work session that this was simply really a correction to some things that were done. But Jan, I'll let you take us through it.
Sure. This is the existing zoning map. The area that the local law applies to is really the North Mosier lot, and I'm mousing over it right here. You can see that a portion is in the CB1 zoning district, and this triangle here, which represents about 1.02 acres, is in the RM10 residential zone. So the proposal is to rezone the North Mosier lot in its entirety to CB1. It accounts for 1.02 acres, and the purpose of that law is to allow the continued use of the facility is for parking. Parking is not allowed, surface parking is not allowed in the RM10 as a standalone use. Parking garages aren't allowed in the RM10, and this parcel is being considered for future redevelopment associated with the RFP and the negotiations with other. So that's what this is all about. It's the rezoning of the North Mosier lot to the CB1 zone to allow for parking.
And this is a referral from the village board. They're simply asking our to weigh in with an opinion This will be an action of the village board.
Correct.
Okay.
Before you roll only for comments.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, before you for comment only, referral from the village board.
Understood. So basically the parking lot or a large portion of the parking lot on the North Mosher lot currently being used for parking isn't allowed for parking because of the zoning. Is that?
Yeah, in the future use, if the property be redeveloped in accordance with the RFP, then that would be a zoning issue. So seeking to remedy that.
And as the planner to the town, your recommendation is?
Certainly to rezone the property to CB1. We prepared the map, the proposed zoning map, and the EAF.
Jan?
Yeah.
Do the property owners that abut this rezoning, are they notified or not?
I'll defer to Whitney on that. I wasn't involved in the notice of the village board's public hearing. There certainly will be a public hearing before the village board.
Okay.
Yeah, this is solely for the referral for your board, and a public hearing was set by the village board. I haven't looked at the notices.
Were the notices sent out?
I don't know whether they were sent out and when they would be sent out. They have to be within a certain period before the meeting.
Okay.
So, but I will want to just tack on to something that Jan said. In addition to this being his recommendation, that it be rezoned to CB1 for a multitude of reasons, it's also consistent with our code. We generally do not like to have parcels, a single parcel with more than one zoning designation. Our code specifically addresses that the fact that a single zoning parcel should only be in one district. And we've modified lot lines in the past, or district boundaries in the past, to make sure that single parcels were wholly within one district.
And this is a single parcel with a district line running through it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's not clear from that map whether it's two parcels or one.
This is what 11053 requires is that the village board refer to you any changes in the zoning. Changes in the zoning map are zoning changes, and it's not incumbent upon you, but it is certainly provided in the code, and it has been the past practice of your board to issue a report to the Board of Trustees. They only have to wait 30 days for you to comment, but otherwise they can ignore it. But by the same token, I'm sure that they would like to hear from you. So if you'd like me to draft a response on your behalf, I'd be happy to.
Board members, comments, thoughts?
I have no objection to it. I mean, to me, it seems like it was an oversight when the zoning maps were changed most recently, and probably should have been picked up sooner. I think it was the intent in being able to develop in the overlay. Or is it an overlay down there? Or is it, or I don't recall now.
It's CB1 and it's also within the overlay.
Right.
Yeah.
So the zoning amendment would be consistent with the new updated master plan in the downtown overlay district.
Yeah, so it's
hard to argue with. If
you want to get very specific, the inquiry by your board is supposed to address whether such change is consistent with the aims and principles embodied in this chapter as to the particular district concern. But we're not changing, it's part of an overall district. Which areas, land uses, buildings, and establishments in the village will be directly affected by such change, and the way that they will be affected, the indirect implications of such change in its effect on other regulations, and finally, whether such proposed amendment is consistent with the aims of the master plan of the village of Mount Kisco. We're trying to implement those aims of the master plan, and there was just an error in the mapping portion of this.
I think that's clear. I'd like to make a motion that we recommend that we have Whitney draft a report to the village board giving our approval for the proposed zoning change. Any discussion on that motion?
I have a little discussion. One, I will not be voting. I own a piece of property that abuts that particular land. I would think historically that land was preserved as RM10 to perhaps protect those homeowners from any infringement of commercial establishments along that space. That being said, I am going to recuse myself from voting because I own a piece of property there.
Well, I think we're not, the intent here is not to change the nature of that area. It's being used as a parking lot. And I think the overlay district envisions, something along those lines.
Well, I think they're envisioning a parking structure, which is different than surface parking. So it's.
Yeah, I hear you.
Just need to make sure that that's on the record, that would assist that zoning changed a parking structure behind those homes. And I'm glad that they're being notified, so they'll have an opportunity to comment.
Yep.
And it may be a moot point at the end of the day, but I just needed to express that.
Okay. So I will continue with my motion that we recommend to the village board this zoning change. Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, there being none, Michelle, would you poll the board?
Chairman Hurst,
Aye.
Mr. Hochstein,
Aye.
Ms. Pickard,
Aye.
Mr. Bigliotti,
I'm gonna, I think it's the right thing to do. I'm going to abstain.
Mr. Bonfort,
Aye.
Mr. Pelesi,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Lardy.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Jan. I appreciate the explanation. There being no further matters before this board tonight, and it being a very late hour, thank you all for attending in all your in-person and virtual methods. And we'll see you again on August 11th. Thank you all very much, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.